Closed crawl spaces. Anybody know what I mean by that? Well, in a typical crawl space, you have dead possums, you have mold, you have rats, you have all kinds of things down there, right? Because you got vents on the side, sometimes the access door is falling off its hinges, and you've got all kinds of bad stuff down there. This is an actual case. This was in Nashville. Some people that we work with up there sent us this photo. This is the return duct, so that means it's connected to the air handler, and whenever the heating and cooling system ran, it's pulling air, it's just sucking air in right there, and right next to it is this dead possum. They wondered where that smell was coming from. So this is a typical crawl space, and what a lot of green homes have, if they have a crawl space, is something that looks like this. It's beautiful. It's got white plastic down on the ground and up the foundation walls. It's not vented to the outside. It's basically conditioned space. This is a conditioned crawl space. If it's a closed crawl space, it doesn't necessarily have to be a conditioned crawl space. If the insulation is up here and you're not adding conditioned air down here, it's just sealed off from the outside. This one is a conditioned crawl space. Right there is a supply vent. I think I've got it. Well, so we'll talk about the ways to deal with air now. 5 ways to deal with the air in a crawl space. One is vent it to the outside. This is the standard way. You could add supply air from the duct system like was in that crawl space you just saw. You can put a little fan in the crawl space and exhaust air to the outside. And you could put a dehumidifier down there. You could use a transfer grill. These 4 methods all apply to closed crawl spaces with the nice plastic vapor barrier all sealed up and no vents to the outside. This one is the only one vented to the outside. So when you have the vented to the outside, you get mold growing. This is on the humidifier in a crawl space in a fairly new home when I visited it a few years ago. So yeah, this is called a closed crawl space or a sealed crawl space or an encapsulated crawl space. It goes by different things. A conditioned crawl space if you're actually supplying conditioned air to it. So those 5 methods: vent to the outside, add supply air, exhaust air to the outside, put a dehumidifier in, or use a transfer grill. We'll explain what that means in a second. This is the typical way of doing a crawl space, and it does not work. We know it does not work now. We've got decades of experience with this. That does not work. It can work in a dry climate. If you are building a house in Arizona, feel free to vent your crawl space to the outside. You're not going to have moisture problems. And this is that same crawl space we saw before. So this is, when I was there, this was blowing out a nice stream of air. You don't need a whole lot of air in the crawl space. It's a smaller volume of space down there. So typically 30, 40, 50 CFM, cubic feet per minute of air coming out of there. And it helps the area stay nice and cool and dry in the summertime, and a little bit warmer in the winter. So your floors will be warmer if you have this kind of crawl space. Adding a dehumidifier is probably a better way to go because the dehumidifier is operating based on the conditions in that crawl space and not based on the conditions upstairs. When you go with this, the air coming out of there is determined by the thermostat upstairs in the conditioned space, in the living space. So it may or may not be right for the crawl space. So if you want to make sure the crawl space gets dehumidified properly, putting a dehumidifier down there may be the best option. And not every encapsulated crawl space needs a dehumidifier. For example, I encapsulated my in-laws' 2 crawl spaces. They have a house built in 1962. It's got basement in the middle, crawl space here, and crawl space here. One of those crawl spaces was fine as soon as I encapsulated. The humidity stayed close to the house levels. It never got above 60%. The other one, the humidity went up 65, 70%, so I had to put a dehumidifier in the front one. So it depends on the crawl space. The key there is monitoring. Have a digital thermohygrometer, which is a fancy word for a thermometer that also measures humidity, and have a remote sensor in the crawl space so you can keep an eye on what the humidity is doing down there. and then you'll know whether you need to address the humidity. So a transfer grill allows the air to mix between the house and the crawl space. That could be used with the supply air in the crawl space. It could be used with a dehumidifier in the crawl space. It could be used with the small exhaust fan in the crawl space. It just allows air to mix between the two. Now, if you have transfer grills between a conditioned crawl space and the house, one thing to be careful of is what you put in that crawl space. Like that one I showed you earlier, the beautiful crawl space. I have a nice big door out in the backyard into the crawl space, and if a homeowner comes in not understanding that crawl space is connected with the house, because it also has a transfer grill. That's not this transfer grill, but it has its own transfer grill. So the air between the living space and the crawl space can move through that transfer grill. If you have that, you don't want to store lawnmowers and pesticides and cans of gasoline in that crawl space, even though you could just roll it right in there from the backyard. Don't do that. You have to understand a conditioned crawl space or an encapsulated crawl space is different. You have to be careful with what you put in there. You want to keep it clean, just like your living room. You're not going to put the lawnmower in the living room, so don't put it in the conditioned crawl space. Okay, so let's talk about spray foam. So one of the probably the biggest benefit of spray foam is it makes the house very airtight. And if you go look here at Serenbe, there's an open house just down Serenbe Lane right here called the Proud Green Home. If you go upstairs into the master bedroom they haven't finished yet, and you can see the spray foam in the walls. That house is extremely airtight. If you pull down the pull-down stairs, as I always do, and go up in the attic, and my wife was getting mad at me and dusting off my coat for afterwards, but I have to do that. So if you pull down those stairs, you can see the ventilation system in that house. They have an ERV, an energy recovery ventilator in that house. It's a very airtight house. So that's the biggest benefit of spray foam. You get well-installed insulation, and the house is going to be very airtight. Another thing it does, if you put it on the roof line, instead of insulating the ceiling here, if you've got an air conditioner or furnace or heat pump up in the attic, now you're bringing it inside the conditioned space, inside the building enclosure, so it's going to be more efficient. Because think about the difference. An air conditioner sitting in an 80 or 85 degree attic space versus an air conditioner sitting in a 130 degree attic space. That's a no-brainer. Spray foam helps you do that. It's easier to install the insulation well than it is to install fiberglass bats well. I've got plenty of pictures of fiberglass bats installed poorly. In fact, you go look at fiberglass bats in just about any house, and it will be difficult to find a good installation of fiberglass bats. This community is probably one of the places you're most likely to see well-installed fiberglass bats, but this community uses spray foam and other technologies. There's a house, if you go down towards the Blue-Eyed Daisy on the right, there's this huge house. That's made out of something called autoclaved aerated concrete, which is insulating concrete. It was pretty cool. So in this community, there's a lot of other things besides fiberglass bats, but there is some fiberglass here. And another benefit is with closed cell spray foam, spray polyurethane foam is SPF, you get increased structure. You can spray the closed cell foam down on the sheetrock in the attic and then walk on it after it's cured. Not right away. You'll still fall through if you don't wait long enough. And you get more R value in less space with the closed cell foam. It's a very high R value per inch. All right. This is a spray foam attic I saw near Columbia, South Carolina this summer, and you can see that the spray foam is completely covering all the roof deck and the framing there.
Is that urethane?
This is spray polyurethane foam. This is open cell spray foam. There are two types of spray foam, open cell and closed cell. This is open cell. Most people around here use open cell. It's less expensive. There's some differences between open cell and closed cell, but most people use open cell around here. One thing to be careful of is humidity up there. If you have to run a dehumidifier in a spray foam attic, something's wrong. This was one I was in a month or so ago, in Atlanta, and they had some serious humidity problems, as you can tell, because the dehumidifier is sitting right there. The problem was they sprayed foam, but they didn't do a good job spraying the foam. There were leaks, lots of leaks. When you get spray foam in an attic, it better be tight, or you haven't done your job as an installer. This house was not tight. This was one of the worst installations I've ever seen. And in that same house, we saw this. This is where the roofers came in and installed a power attic ventilator after the foam had gone in. So if you have a house with spray foam in the attic like this, and it's on the roof deck, roofers who don't know any better sometimes will come in and say, oh, you need to vent that attic to the outside and we'll put a fan in. We'll put in 5 fans for you. We'll put in a ridge vent and a gable vent. No, no, no. You want this to be tight. And so you don't want any kind of attic ventilation, and especially not fans. So the roofers installed it, and then it had to be taken out again, and they didn't do a very good job sealing it up. So that's one thing to watch out for with spray foam attics.